sure if I got disconnected or if I'm reconnected to my initial podcast, but anyway, here goes again. I'm lost track, and that's okay. Um, I just got off the phone with a lady when it comes to systemic racism, and I think that's the core of the whole thing. Is like there's a lot of things when it comes to intergenerational trauma or crimes against humanity or just crimes in general of complacency or things that we think like why should we even get involved or why should we even start talking about these things again. It's called I like it, like sometimes I think in terms of psychology we really have to motivate ourselves. It's like aging, you know, you have a to-do list and you write it down and, you know, it looks all nice, but then the actual work has to be done. And, you know, it's like karma, you know, you say, oh, well, natural law. But again, too, all this has to do with movement and the energy of doing the action. So, I mean, as much as I do my podcast and I transfer it to my blog, a lot of times just the psychology or the psychopathy of being human is so abstract. That's the only way I can talk about it. Because in order to qualify in the sense of a self validation, like a friend of mine told me, she says, it's one thing, you know, we could sit and hypothesize about things, but if we're just spinning our wheels, we're really doing ourselves injustice. We're really praying bad for ourselves. So we have to understand there's a lot of things that you know, we think we understand, but it's harder to get motivated to participate. And I think a lot of times when it comes to human sexuality, I think sometimes we take for granted our own personal needs. You know, I talk about things that I've missed in my life through choice, and the things that I've learned about myself, and what I try to instill in younger women, so that younger women would have a healthier lifestyle than some women that I have seen and continually, you know, look at because of the choices we make as women. So a friend of mine, she you know, when I talk to her and I say, you know, some of my friends are just curious. You know, they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to call you," and I'm going, "No, they're not going to call me." And they said, "Well, of course they're not going to call you because they just want to know what's going on." And so when it comes to corruption and I use the term, even though it's not money laundering or tax evasion or racketeering, the realities of passing money and how things are being met and said and done is criminal. Even my talking about it, somebody could say, "Well, I'm going to sue you for slander." And I'm going, this is all hypothetical. This isn't the reality of it. This is a theory. And for me, the theory is if you have a leader who's been diagnosed or who's been critiqued by a forensic psychologist saying that this person has a propensity for boys, and if this certain leader has been enabling a certain medicine man, a false prophet, false prophet who also has a propensity for boys, not only boys but girls as well, who from this propensity has been allowed and given permission by his followers in a cult to practice these deviant behaviors of videotaping himself having sex with children. Now, this is hypothetical and theoretical, but the reality of the fact is when you're in your 50s and 70s and these things have come to light, have percolated to the top, think about it. Don't you think that behavior had to have started someplace, somewhere. And how long has this propensity been bubbling to the surface? And how many victims have there been? So when it comes to human trafficking and you have children who've been trafficked, it takes a long time for children to start talking about these things. I mean, for me, I was 19. It took, 20 years, 23 years? Now, why is this so important? Well, again, when it comes to leadership and how people follow people because they appear to be godlike, like I use the analogy, they appear to be the priest in Indian residential school who has authority over the entire residential school, or the Indian agent who has authority over everybody, or the RCMP officer who can make an arrest. Anybody who's in a position of power who takes advantage and corrupts and manipulates and destroys another human being. I've been schooled in saying, well, don't call them monsters. Well, what do you call them when they've transformed themselves into something that isn't human, in the sense of, would a human being do these things to their children? And as horrible and as horrible as it sounds, this has been going on since the beginning of time. And I think that's probably why a lot of people go poo-poo and they don't want to hear about it. But the reality of it is, as we age and how we handle our human sexuality is the reality of it, and how people see elderly people. So before the pandemic, or during the pandemic, there was a case of sexually transmitted diseases in nursing homes. A lot of the seniors who were in nursing homes were being promiscuous. Women who had been married to their husbands, where the couple enter old folks' home, she becomes promiscuous, catches a sexually transmitted disease, not from her husband, but from the many partners in the nursing home. An elderly man gets put into a nursing home by his sons. He is so frustrated, he screams on the top of his voice during his lunch, "I need sex." And what happens? They find a laptop, try to figure out how to calm him, his nervous system. This is a senior. And they find that the only way they can calm him down is through pornography. So as we age and how we understand our own human sexuality and what it means to brain health, here's a question. Okay, and this is a hypothetical theory here. If I, again, okay, I want to put it to me, I'm saying hypothetically. If I, what's the word? If I gambled, and I gamble, and my mind is constantly just focused on that type of escapism, or what do you call, deassociating myself in the gambling position, and I do that, and my brain is conditioned to gamble that way. On top of that, if I am also watching pornography as again, this routine of like, what am I going to do in loneliness and isolation? And then on top of all that, the dopamine or the endorphins or whatever is in the brain for what I eat, like junk food. So understand that, like, if you're a senior, or even if you're in the process of like isolation, like when the pandemic hit, and you have this gambling addiction, pornography addiction, food addiction, it only takes 2 months of isolation without doing these activities for your brain health to improve. So again, how we think things affect us, if we're in denial of it and we keep functioning this way, then it'll surface and it'll eventually show up as we age. So I'm just talking. I'm not talking like I don't know these things. I do enjoy gambling once a month. I didn't even know what pornography. I knew what pornography was in 1976. I didn't know you could freely access it until like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Because of the pandemic, people were talking about it, and so I Googled it. And again, I also heard about it, I think, on TikTok. So yes, I researched it and I thought, oh my goodness. I always thought that the internet was policed. So again, I didn't want to go on the internet looking at a porn site. But when I found out that it wasn't policed, do you know that looking up ordnances like TNT and bomb fuses and stuff like that, they'll target that before they'll target you in terms of pornography? Again, only because I've had to do research on fuses and explosives. But the reality too is like even how you eat, like the satisfaction or self gratification. So for me, I'm trying to look after my mental health. My like it's one thing to have a narrative. When I'm talking about mental health, I'm talking about the actual physiology of the brain, the rooting and the synapses and reconstructing it. Like you've got to be malleable enough that you know you being away from these addictions only reshapes or rewires your brain. I'm 74. I didn't start gambling until I was, I think, 50. And like I said, I didn't even know about porn until 3 years ago. And as far as food addiction, I think what's been maybe since I was in my 50s. So little things like that. My whole life, I haven't been involved in that. Most of my life, I've been concentrating more on sexuality. What is obsession? What is limerence? And a lot of people, like when you're infatuated, that's a healthy thing because eventually it could lead to marriage and relationships. And but you have to have that discourse. You have to understand how to have a dialogue or conversation. Limerence isn't as simple as the word itself. I think there are a lot of people who believe and they have workshops on how to eliminate, but it's far more complicated than that. It's not that just something that you can like AA or you know some sort of support group. Limerence, yes, there are support groups for limerence. It's only the tip of the iceberg. I really believe it's a deep psychological ingrained human trait. I think it takes a collective, holistic approach to eliminate self-defeating behavior. However, limerence, you can also have relapses and recovery. And people neglect to say these things because most people just want to fix, you know, magic wand, abracadabra, you're fixed. But in order to believe and to understand, it's like somebody who's been involved in AA their whole life, that they think for the rest of their lives they're actually have this propensity to alcohol, when really it's how they see themselves, their identity. So how you see yourself in your identity is important, and that's why when it comes to mental health and early childhood development, as well as being a young adult in your early 20s, it is important to understand how we evolve all the time, every 10 years or so, in our identity. So by the time you become an elder, you've gone through so many changes within your life. And so I try to talk about that in terms of healthy human sexuality. And even the gut feeling that, you know, people aren't really there for me. If they were, they'd have the courage to ask me, why aren't you talking to me anymore? I have friends who would say that. I have a friend, you know, we have discussions about this. What are friends for? So it's taken me a long time. And a lot of times I think when people think, oh, I can't live alone, I need to have a partner. And in a sense, like my whole life I've been alone, save for the exception when I started taking care of my mother, my late mother, caregiver, and then being a caregiver to my niece. But most of my life I've managed to be on my own. And at the same time, though, even though I'm alone, I'm never truly alone. I know a lot of people want to talk about so many things that's a great mystery in our life, and keep it that mystery. Keep the great mystery alive. Because nothing is set in terms of how we believe or what happens to us. Things that I had never thought I would ever experience in my life, I experienced. Impossible things that I just never thought I would experience, I've experienced. And likely so, it might not seem such a great thing. But for me, as a human being, and as I reflect in my life, I, I'm just grateful. So whatever information and how I give it out to my audience, I hope you take it and understand. Some of the things that I talk about are only hypothetical theories based on basic, not basics, the basics of what identity is. So the clarifying and understanding and saying, okay, based on this, this is what the theory is. So based on the fact that one of our leadership has a propensity for boys, based on the fact that this person was ashamed to be Indigenous, passed himself as Mexican when he was in high school, has always been perceived by Indigenous women as some sort of pervert, has just has like all the time being around him, you just feel like, oh my goodness, it's making my guts turn. People would ask me, well, Marita, don't you find him attractive? I'm going, are you kidding me? So for whatever perverse reason, people perceived him in a different way than I did, really makes you wonder, like, oh my goodness, are we so different? Yes, as human beings, we are so different. And again, the propensity for him to be attracted to children, um, it's a really hard thing to comprehend. I remember this one child, I spanked him, and I stopped myself. I stopped myself because when I looked at him, he enjoyed it, and it was scary because he had been abused so much that like it just shocked me, and I like it's not just that made me curious about childhood behavior or just the reality of classical conditioning or grooming, fawning, all this stuff. When I look at my parents and my grandparents in Indian residential school, and I look at the layers of adults who had no boundaries in what they did to children. I think that's why it's so perverse and why people don't like listening to my podcast, is because I talk about the perversion of it. And how could you look at a man who practices sweat lodges and Sundance and has a following of young girls following him? How could he have such propensity for the deviance of what it actually has them sexually aroused? As a man, it's like his erection. That's what stimulates him. He needs to have it, like it's an addiction. And for him to use children in ceremonies, hit them over the head, or just groom them, just convince their mothers that their daughters or their a child, their girls are in need of grooming, and that things are so bad because there's no dad or father figure or a protector visible, that men like that can take advantage, or that women want to be in a relationship because they don't want to be alone, so they gravitate to some political leader who appears to be like a good provider, and yet the just hiding it. That's what's so disgusting, because it took decades. It took decades. Understand this. Even when I warn people about different people I mean, yeah, we can say about Nathan chasing horse, but believe me, in my community, and there are people in my community, I even warned people about them and nobody listened. So that's why I do my podcast and I'm saying no. I truly believe as human beings, we all have that gut feeling. We all know. And the reality of it is a lot of times as Indigenous women who follow their gut, who have led, amazing lives, that we will not tolerate certain things. And the fact that we don't makes us to be, people that certain people don't want to be around, or they want to be around us to make themselves feel better, that they are smarter. Again, why? I've had to prove myself in university classes, taking tests after tests after tests. I've had to prove myself working in systemic racism structures, going to work every day, dealing with racism. And you want a piece of me? Because you think like that by talking to me, you get to experience what I've experienced and then stab me in the back. So much, like, it's heartbreaking. You get to a point where you get battle fatigue, and I know it hurts me when people hate me and treat me like shit. And I had to have this woman say to me, Marina, you're a nice person. Do these nice things for yourself. And she went on to say, well, so and so thinks you're nice. I think you're nice. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'm nice. You're nice. We're nice people. Put some boundaries down. And, like, of course, when I lived in Utah, I was alone. Sometimes I was in an apartment by myself when the semesters were free in the summer. Just the reality of, like, struggling to go to work by myself, doing things by myself, put me in a class of my own, especially around men and how they preyed upon women, vulnerable women. I had a lot of times where I was infatuated. I didn't realize that I was actually grooming myself. Like my friend says, sometimes we pray bad on ourselves. And I think in terms of limerence, we do that in the sense of infatuations, like, oh, it's okay to be infatuated with this guy. But without even understanding that all of a sudden it turns into limerence. Like why did I do that? Why did I put myself in that position to let people know I was infatuated with this man? And I didn't know it had to do with just how I felt about myself, my identity. Because as women, we do more harm to ourselves. So my Polynesian roommate, who was living rent-free, created a narrative that a Polynesian friend of hers was interested in me. And I listened to her. She was so convincing. And it was getting to the point where, like, she was living 4 months rent-free. It got to the point where I'm going, okay, yes, I find him attractive, I'm infatuated. But I kept the narrative going. And that's where the limerence came in, because I didn't know that I was looking for love. But where? I had to physically go and talk to the man and say to him, my roommate made this narrative up about you liking me. Not saying to him, oh yeah, I know I'm a nice person, but just the reality that she manipulated me into believing that he was infatuated with me. And then he disclosed, no, he says, I'm not infatuated with you. And I thanked him. But that was the beginning of not even the beginning. I mean, I thought I fell in love with this beautiful, handsome California white guy when I was 18. Oh, tragedy. The things you fall for. All he wanted was sex, okay? I mean, you talk about, what do you call promiscuity? It's acceptable for men, especially military men, whereas it's not acceptable for single Indigenous women. Oh no, single Indigenous women who are promiscuous are just asking. No, no. I walked away from him. Could you imagine being addicted to sex, having that craving so damn bad, and you walk away? That was my first experience at 18. And I truly, like as I'm 74 and I reflect back on that and I think about all the struggles I've had when it comes to women manipulating other women into believing their bullshit to get something done. Either get ahead in the job or some diabolical scheme. Excuse me, like I've just had, after witnessing what I did in Las Vegas and all the shit I went through in social media with people I knew, I just said, nope, boundaries down. I'm not going to be manipulated by women. The whole point of recovery in terms of being a victim of violence is to be able to stand your ground and not be afraid to confront the person who's hurting you. And that's a part of the whole part of taking infatuation and separating it from limerence. Because then with limerence, you're confronting the perpetrator and you're not afraid to face the narrative, the false narrative that was created to put you in a place of safety. Even if that safety is created in a false illusion or delusion of love. I think that's why I think a lot of people in other countries think that it's okay to marry your rapist. So the mental health and the strategy of just being a woman and following your gut feelings about how other women treat you or how you yourself pray bad on yourself. Sometimes I talk about hung prayers and what they mean. And I was talking to this artist friend he's a chairperson for art college. So I'm not talking, some vagabond or some, a street artist. I'm talking about someone who's gone through ceremony and ritual, who's has seen and heard collective and holistic ways of healing in ceremony and in ritual. We have discussions about how sometimes when people are jealous or hate, especially when you don't realize that some people are just mean. I didn't realize people could pray. Like, when I'm so I'm so fucking indoctrinated into Christianity that I think prayer is supposed to be something, like you're asking for the best in life. But, it's thought. It's a thought. Okay, so prayer is a thought. I just, when I try to define what hung prayers are, it's a really hard thing to comprehend, especially you yourself. If you do this to yourself, then you're doing more damage to yourself. I call that self-defeating behavior. And self-defeating behavior is manifested in illusions and delusional ways of thinking. So yes, we do hang prayers on ourselves. However, there's also more diabolical, like I said, my roommate who was sponging off of me, manipulating, gaslighting, how we fawn. That, when we allow people to try and control us, even people who have a propensity for being sexually attracted to us, a lot of times we don't realize that they're preying on us, not just physically, emotionally, but even spiritually. So they're praying for bad things to happen to us. And so these are hung prayers. These hung prayers are manifested in different ways. Physically,